In this episode, we talk about what a recent study says about the state of India's juvenile justice system and what its findings reveal about how well the system is meeting its goal of rehabilitating children. We also explain why IndiGo Airlines has been facing long delays and widespread cancellations over the past few days. But we begin today by talking about how some exporters have managed to mitigate the impact of the US tariffs. Hi, I am Niharika Nanda, and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. After the United States imposed a 50% tariff on Indian goods earlier this year, exporters have been worried not just about the short-term losses, but also about the long-term impact on their businesses, especially since the US is their biggest market. But now, nearly 100 days in, it turns out that several product categories have managed to find alternative markets for their goods, potentially offsetting some of the losses. In this segment, my colleague Shashank Bhargava speaks to the Indian Express's Ravi Dutta Misra, who analysed the data released by the Commerce and Industry Ministry.
Ravi, tell us about the products that have been able to do this, that have been able to mitigate some of the impact of these tariffs.
So there are a bunch of high margin products which have found markets elsewhere. Particularly, we have written about marine products because China is importing a lot of marine products from India now because they have tense situation with Japan. European Union has also absorbed a bit of our marine products. Japan has also Thailand. So these are the countries who have bought our marine products. And then we see a similar trend in automobile component exports. They have found market in Germany, which is a big automobile manufacturer. So the difference the data suggests is, number one, the high margin products have managed to move to other countries, but the low margin products like garments, they have not. And ultimately, what we see is that there will be a very uneven impact of the US tariffs, hurting the smaller players more than the large industries.
And could you give us some more examples of the kind of products that have low margins and that are facing the most challenges?
So, yesterday I was speaking to handicraft manufacturers. They are based mostly in Jaipur. Some of them are in Gurgaon. And they were saying that they are struggling to find newer markets because, number one, US was the largest market. And number two, when your margins are low, it is rather difficult for you to immediately, change your suppliers or find new buyers. On top of that, you have to look at your loans. So on the immediate basis, it is difficult for leather products, sports goods to really work around US tariffs.
And you mentioned Germany when it came to auto parts. What are some of the other places where India has been able to export its products?
So, interesting country that appeared in number of products is UAE. As you know, UAE is a transshipment hub and a lot of products go via UAE to other countries. So, UAE is one of the countries that is showing up in the data. Again, Thailand is also a common name that is coming up. Japan is also a common name. And largely, these countries are Asian countries. So we have to know that the speed of growth in trade particularly is much higher in Asia than other places. And eventually, our linkages in Asia could help us in fighting this off.
And initially when the tariffs were announced, exporters were contemplating, whether they should lower their prices because now they would be facing an even tougher competition. But considering that they're finding these new markets, are they still considering that approach?
So that is a big point of worry. So, the lack of clarity on the US deal is something that is hurting our plans. For instance, we just reported that around 2 billion worth of orders from the US, summer orders, for which preparation starts a little early in the winters. So negotiations on those orders are stuck because the suppliers are not sure if the tariffs will come down to 25% or to 15% or to 19%. So that is the issue over here. US tariffs are at 50%, but then it could have a larger and a longer sustained impact because these orders tend to come in fairly early. Work starts happening in the next 3 or 4 months, the products are manufactured, the capacity is decided, the rates are decided. So the whole lot of process goes into these supplies. And if there is uncertainty about the deal, it kind of hurts our interest.
And Ravi, can this also be seen as a silver lining of sorts? The fact that they're finding these new markets and they maybe aren't as reliant on the US anymore?
It's too early to say, because in most of the product categories, US is the largest market, and US has explicitly informed its trade partners or warned its trade partners against transshipments. So any product being rerouted to the US through other country will eventually face a risk if that is happening.
For example, if we sell something to the UAE and then UAE sells that thing to the US.
Yeah, so eventually those things could come under the radar, and that could be a problem going forward. So these might be short-term arrangements that exporters might have gotten into, or partially there could be a higher demand elsewhere. So there are a lot of things that we don't know at this point, and maybe a 3-month or 4-month impact will give us a better clarity. But the early data suggests that some Indian exporters have managed to withhold their markets elsewhere.
And earlier you had briefly mentioned the apparel industry. Now, that's an industry where the margins are low, competition is very high. You have our neighbor Bangladesh that makes a lot of apparel. There's also Vietnam, China, of course. Talk about how that sector is coping right now.
So, this is something that everybody produces, even our neighboring country like Pakistan. And on Pakistan, US tariffs are at 19%. So the problem is, if you have a unique product, it could manage to land up in Europe or other countries. But then if Cambodia is also fighting, if Bangladesh is fighting, if Vietnam is also fighting, and they have efficient supply chains, and that also goes against us. We are competitive in textile industry. We are fairly competitive, but if we talk about Bangladesh, their textile manufacturing is higher than China in few respects. So some of the countries have been doing this for a long time. They have set supply chains and they are taking advantage. The orders that should have come to India are going to Bangladesh, and exporters are talking about it, that few people who have had long-standing relationship with our suppliers have arranged 25% kind of a sharing of these tariffs, but then some do not see business interests anymore. Who is going to absorb these 50%? Certainly not the workforce. And for instance, the manufacturers in Jaipur, and they were worried that there'll be layoffs and then they'll have difficulty getting them back.
And talk about the status of the deal so far. How far into the talks are we right now?
So here there's something really interesting happening. We have sent across our proposal of the deal, our best proposal, what we are willing to give, what we are willing to open, our stand on agriculture, our stand on automobile, all those sensitive issues. That has been sent across and that has been communicated by our ministry to the press, on everybody. And now things are at a political level. So there's a likelihood that the US decision will be taken by the end of the year. That is what our Commerce Secretary said. And only then we will be able to figure out what kind of rates will be applicable on India. But on the background, we are trying to negotiate deals with New Zealand, Israel, European Union. So there's a fair chance that a lot of these trade deals will come through much before the US, especially European Union. There's a lot of work going on and it's one of our biggest market. Apparently, a legal team that is working on the EU deal was asked to avoid taking leaves so that this deal is secured, our new market is secured, and beyond our exports, a trade deal and these tariffs, particularly the US tariffs, have hurt our investments. So if a new market opens up, there will be a signal for higher investments to come in. So that is what our government is trying to do. Again, this could also change. So this is the point of volatility. US Supreme Court is also here in the case. And there's a likelihood that US tariffs under IPA no longer stay if the court decides so. So there's a lot of uncertainty and much should happen in the next 1 month.
And next, we turn our attention to India's juvenile justice system. A system meant to protect children from being treated like adults, and one that focuses on rehabilitating young offenders rather than simply punishing them.
The core philosophy of the juvenile justice system, it's actually distinct from the adult criminal justice system.
That's the Indian Express's Vineet Bhalla, who writes on law for the paper.
in the sense that it is focused exclusively on the rehabilitation of the child, and the primary objective under the Juvenile Justice Act of 2014 is to ensure the best interest of the child. So the system operates on this basis that children are a unique category, and even the term that is used is when they come in conflict with the law. We don't say that they have committed criminal offenses. We say that they have come in conflict with the law. Even in those situations, the goal is not to punish them, but to reform them so that they can reintegrate into the society as efficient members. So the law mandates child-friendly approach in how these juvenile justice cases are dealt with. And it emphasizes that putting a child in a childcare home should be a last resort measure.
But while that's the goal in theory, a new analysis by the India Justice Report shows the many challenges the system faces in actually meeting those objectives. The report points to structural gaps, a lack of transparency, and systemic inefficiencies that often fail to protect a child's dignity, leaving many of them dealing with the same issues adults face. So, to understand India's juvenile justice system more closely and to break down the findings of this report, we are speaking to Vineet in this segment. Now, Vineet, you recently wrote about this study titled Juvenile Justice and Children in Conflict with Law, which was published by the India Justice Report. Before we talk about its findings, tell us what it was trying to find out in the first place.
So, the India Justice Report, IJR, they wanted to conduct a capacity check of the juvenile justice legal system in India. And they produced this report this year because this year marked one full decade since the current Juvenile Justice Act was passed. They wanted to see if the machinery that is required under the Act, whether it actually exists and delivers on the ground. So they looked at whether there is enough infrastructure, enough staff, enough budget in these juvenile justice institutions. They asked very basic questions like, are there functioning juvenile justice boards? Do they have enough social workers and judicial members? Are rehabilitation homes and shelter homes actually in place? And since there is no centralized database for this, which is available for public viewing, they had to file, I think, about 250 right to information applications across all states and union territories to get the data that they used for this report.
So, Vineet, what have been some of its key findings and what kind of challenges has it recognized within the juvenile justice system?
So, the findings in the report are frankly quite alarming. It paints this picture of a system with vast structural deficits. There is huge pendency, there are severe staff shortages, and essentially the infrastructure and staffing is not at all in consonance with the intent of the Act.
Right, and you mentioned the huge pendency in cases as one of the issues. And this is something that the adult justice system also faces. But tell us, why is this happening and how does this delay impact the children?
So the delay, just like with the adult justice system, the delay in the juvenile justice system is also, the reason behind it is largely administrative. So, for example, under the Juvenile Justice Act, each juvenile justice board must have a principal magistrate who's a legal officer and two social workers who are not necessarily from a legal background, but they should have some sort of understanding of how to reform and rehabilitate children and look after their emotional welfare. Now, what the IGR report found out was that 24% of all JJBs that they got data for, they were not fully constituted, which means that either they did not have a principal magistrate or they did not have one or both social workers. And often in most of these JJBs, the magistrate is holding that post as an additional charge, which is to say that they are deputed as judges in one of the local courts, and they're doing this as a side gig, so to speak, which means that they are not coming for daily hearings at the JJB. As to how this delay impacts children, from my understanding, from the literature I've read, the impact is actually far more severe, the impact of this delay, than it is for an adult. So if you keep a child in one of these shelter homes for maybe 1 or 2 years, then that is a big percentage of their age, right? So it sort of disrupts their education. It increases trauma for them. It separates them from their family and their support network. The report actually says that, I'm quoting from the report, that the promise of disposing of cases without delay remains largely unfulfilled. And it says that children are effectively suffering like adult under trial prisoners. That is, that they're looking for, that they're incarcerated and their cases go on pending for months and years.
And since the vacancies are a big issue, and you mentioned there not being enough principal magistrates and social workers, so tell us about some of the other positions and roles that remain vacant, and what do we assess are the possible reasons behind it?
So there are vacancies across the board, from the JJBs to the support staff at these homes. Out of the 470 JJBs that responded to the RTI applications filed by IJR, out of those 470, 111 said that the JJBs were not fully constituted. So that is 25%, right? Apart from that, there is also a shortage of legal cum probation officers. Legal cum probation officers are required to sort of track the progress of the case of the child while they are kept in custody. And according to the report, from the 10 states that provided full data, the average workload of a legal cum probation officer was 175 cases per officer. So you can imagine how unsustainable that is. An officer cannot provide, realistically speaking, full attention to 175 children's cases at all times. And inside these homes also, there is a shortage of care staff and medical staff. As to the reasons behind this, I think the reasons are the same as for vacancies across government institutions, which is bureaucratic lethargy. There are delays in appointments, there is lack of funds, and perhaps there is not political will to give priority to this particular segment.
Another very important thing in all of this are, of course, the rehabilitation spaces where these children are meant to stay. So what does the study say about the current state of these facilities?
So again, nothing great, the state of these facilities as per the report. So according to law, let's go into what kind of facilities are to be provided, legally speaking. According to the Juvenile Justice Act, there are 3 types of homes for kids who are in conflict with law. There are observation homes, which are for temporary stay of children against whom case is currently pending in a JJB. Then there are special homes, which are meant to house children again who have been convicted of an offense, who have been found to be in conflict with the law. So there are special homes where they're kept for rehabilitation, where the JJB might order that they stay for a specific period of time. And then there are places of safety, which are for those who are accused of particularly heinous crimes. So what the study found out was that in 14 states, there is not even a single designated place of safety. This is highly problematic because this means that children who are of different age groups and who might have been accused of different categories of offenses might be mixing together, which defeats the purpose of having a separate place of safety in the first place. And oversight is also a concern because JJBs are supposed to inspect these homes at least once a month. But the data from the report shows that less than half of the mandated inspections were completed.
Also, Vineet, the poor state of medical care is something that is often highlighted for adults under trials. But is that the case with children as well?
Yes, unfortunately, that is the case with children who are in conflict with the law as well. So, as per the report, 15 states provided data on staffing in childcare institutions. Out of these, from this data, IJR found that 80% reported having no medical staff or doctors. So out of 171 institutions that responded to this specific query of whether you have doctors or not, only 19 had doctors. So 19 out of 171 institutions had doctors, which is to say that 152 of 171 institutions did not have doctors at all. What this means is that the children who are placed in these 152 institutions, they are being denied basic healthcare access.
And do we have a sense of how many children are currently within the juvenile system? Do we have data for that?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any data for exact numbers. There are estimates in place, but exact numbers we don't know because, as I earlier pointed out, and that there is no centralized data system for juvenile justice, which is why IGR came out with this report in the first place. Based on the RTI responses that have been mentioned in the report from 21 states. So from 21 states, the number estimated is 50,000. So 50,000 children were awaiting justice as of October last year. The total workload in the report was about 1 lakh cases. So in these 21 states, there are 1 lakh cases which are currently pending and 50,000 children are currently awaiting justice. They are currently involved in pending cases. But the report also criticizes the lack of data transparency and the lack of easy access to data. It calls the state of data when it comes to the juvenile justice system a data black hole. And they have also mentioned in the report that almost a quarter of their RTI queries did not receive any reply.
And Vineet, what do people within the system like judges have to say about this situation?
So the IJR report itself includes comments from Justice Madan Lokur, former Delhi High Court and Supreme Court judge who has worked extensively on juvenile justice, both during his tenure as a judge and afterwards. He has called it very worrying that there are so many JJBs which don't have a full bench, and he pointed out to the detrimental effect this will have on children who are caught in the system. And his main takeaway was that unless we have a centralized, transparent data system, we cannot hold the system accountable. And during the launch of this report, which I had attended, IJR had invited on a panel of speakers a lady who had worked as a social worker on one of the JJBs in Maharashtra. And she herself, while recalling her experiences, said that the system is so terribly inadequate in terms of both infrastructure, funds, people, that it is just not possible for the people who are there in the system, who are supposed to take care of the children, who are members of JJBs, even if they have the best intentions, it is not possible for them to carry out their work effectively and look after the best interests of the child as is mandated by the Juvenile Justice Act.
And finally, we turn to the chaos brewing inside IndiGo, India's largest airline. For the past few days, IndiGo has been dealing with major disruptions, with long delays and widespread cancellations intensifying since Tuesday. Hundreds of flights have been cancelled, many more have been delayed by several hours, and only a fraction of the airline's schedule has been operated on time. On Wednesday alone, IndiGo's on-time performance dropped to under 20%, compared with around 50% at the start of the week. According to the Indian Express's Sukalp Sharma, the chaos has primarily been driven by crew shortages triggered by the second phase of India's new flight duty time limitation norms, which came into effect last month. These rules increase pilots' weekly rest requirements, limit night landings, and expand the definition of nighttime flying, changes that are meant to address pilot fatigue. While the new norms apply to all airlines, IndiGo has been hit the hardest because of its enormous scale, high-frequency network, heavy reliance on late-night flights, and a model built on very high aircraft and crew utilization. So this leaves little room for adjustment when crew availability tightens. Other airlines, Sukalp points out, have been operating at lower utilization levels due to delays in aircraft deliveries and maintenance-related groundings, giving them more flexibility in pilot rostering. Now, IndiGo's own data shows how sharply operations have been affected. In November alone, it cancelled more than 1,200 flights, most of them due to the new norms. Airports across major cities from Bengaluru and Delhi to Mumbai and Chennai reported dozens of cancellations, leaving thousands of passengers stranded. The airline has apologized and says a combination of unforeseen operational challenges has compounded the impact of the flight duty time limitation norms. These include minor tech glitches, winter schedule adjustments, bad weather, and rising congestion. IndiGo says it has begun calibrated adjustments to stabilize operations over the next 48 hours, which will involve more cancellations and rescheduling. It is also offering alternate flights or refunds to affected passengers. Meanwhile, Sukalp reports that the regulator DGCA has launched an investigation and asked IndiGo to explain how the situation escalated. Pilot groups, however, have blamed IndiGo's long-standing lean staffing strategy and say the airline should have prepared better for rules it knew were coming. They allege the disruptions could have been avoided with stronger hiring, better retention, and more realistic scheduling. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank, Bhargava, and me, Niharika, Nanda. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.